Hello, listeners, and welcome to Film Swap.
Hi there.
and My name is David Seeley, and for your consideration uh, is the award for the best podcast co-host ever is my good friend sitting across from me virtually, Mr. Jonathan Pritchard Barrett. Jono, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. I've really enjoyed our films and looking forward to chatting about them, David.
What is the theme of today's show, Jono?
Well, we now we have a theme, and because this week it's the Oscars, so the theme obviously had to be Oscar related, didn't it? Our theme was films that have lost out to the films that could or should have won the Oscar and lost out to sort of less well known or in retrospect lesser films.
Yes.
And so, yeah, that was our theme.
Well, what do you think about the Oscars, Jonathan? Because some people love this kind of award seasons and stuff, and other people have different kind of views. What's your position on award season?
I don't mind it. I have nothing. I mean, I wouldn't say that we're talking the pinnacle necessarily of cinema, winning all the prizes, but it's a good talking point, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though the Oscars is effectively kind of a marketing. Event really is what it
Pretty
really
much.
boils down to. Uh, consistently the films that have won the awards and things are of good quality,
Yep.
sometimes great quality,
Yep.
and you can't really argue, with things like recently like Parasite and things like that are really great films, and
Yep.
you can't argue with that, and there's
And
nothing wrong with.
Separation, and a Separation, which won about 10 years ago for the best foreign language film, was I would say a masterpiece.
Yeah,
It was a terrific
absolutely.
movie.
There's some of the greatest films of all time have been mixed in there, and there's nothing wrong with drawing attention to great quality stuff. I
No.
mean, I always take with a grain of salt these things, the sort of the best and the greatest and the all that kind of stuff, because
Yeah.
that kind of becomes a bit more subjective, and I don't think you can ever really say anything is the greatest, the
No.
single greatest thing ever,
Yeah.
except for podcast co-hosts, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, but so the Oscars, I always take it with a grain of salt, but it is certainly fun to talk about these things. So on that note,
On that note, yes.
who's
On that
going to
note,
go
I think
first?
well, we both. I mean, I have to say, I was a bit at sea, and so I did some googling and looked at some lists for the films that sort of lost out. And the film that I chose was one that I hadn't actually seen, but I was very keen on seeing, and it is from the 1950s, and it is 12 Angry Men. And so, which one did
Oh
you
wow.
choose?
Well, I mean, there was a lot to choose from, Jonathan. When we decided to pick this subject, and I then went through and looked at a list of all the films throughout the history of the Oscars that have been nominated for Best Picture, and it's a lot of films. It was something like 591, I think it was. Is it,
Gosh,
or it was in that neighborhood anyway.
that's a lot.
Yes, there's a lot of films, so I immediately felt overwhelmed, and so in the end, I picked a film which is a truly great film, one of the great classics of American cinema, and amazingly, it didn't win the Oscar for Best Picture, and it is called High Noon.
I've heard the name, but I've never seen it.
Well, it's an interesting thing that you say that, because these are the kind of films that nowadays I think they're the kind of films that everyone's kind of heard about but haven't necessarily seen, aren't they?
I am that person who's heard about it but not seen it.
Well, I'm certainly happy to recommend that to you tonight and to anyone. And I think we should go away, watch our films, and then come back and talk about them.
Absolutely, let's do that.
Okay, so let's go down the basement. We're going to thread up the projector and get that going. And we'll be back in a few hours to discuss what we've seen.
Bye.
And we're back.
We're back. Here we are. Wow, what two great films. Really enjoyed those films.
Fantastic, actually. Really, really great films, both of them. And
Yeah.
interestingly, and this is sheer coincidence, but both of the films have a little bit of a common theme running through them, don't they? A
They very
little
much
bit.
do, yeah.
And that wasn't intentional on our part, because I didn't know which film Jonathan was going to propose. But yeah, which one did you want to talk about first? Shall I go first?
Let's go with your one, because your film, High Noon, was made in 1952, and
Yes.
mine, 12 Angry Men, was made in 1957. So chronologically, I think we should start with you.
Okay. Well, that's fair enough.
The judges left town, Harvey's quit, and I'm having trouble getting deputies.
People gotta talk themselves into law and order before they do anything about it. Maybe because down deep they don't care.
Well, I guess first we should talk about why you picked it. What was the competing films at the Oscars that year? And I know you said that you just it was something you wanted to see. I guess was one of the.
No, no, High Noon was the one, your film. My film was 12 Angry Men.
Okay. So definitely getting a little bit muddled up here, but that's what podcast editing was invented for. Well, I don't know. Perhaps I'll leave it in just so that to
Why not?
keep it light.
Yeah.
Anyway, High Noon, Jonathan, 1952 film
Yep.
by Fred Zinnemann, who was a really great director. He made a lot of really great films. Oklahoma, The Nun Story, From Here to Eternity, and then later on, he made a film which is a favorite of mine, A Man for All Seasons, which
Yep.
incidentally, again, has quite a similar theme running through it in comparison to the films we'll be talking about tonight.
Yep.
He made The Day of the Jackal as well,
Great
which is
film. Love
quite a
that film.
great film.
Yep.
So he's had quite a diverse career. He didn't just do westerns; he's done some musicals and
Yeah.
high drama and thrillers and all sorts. So quite an interesting guy.
Very.
And this particular film, which came out in 1952, was up against the winning film in that year. It
Yep.
lost out to Cecil B. DeMille's The Greatest Show on Earth.
Never heard of it.
Oh, well, I think that says it all, Jonathan. Uh, but again, to be fair, I mean, the greatest show on earth is, although I would not be one to argue that it was, in fact, the greatest show on earth, but it's an entertaining enough film, and that sort of Cecil B. DeMille kind of a big dumb
Spectacles.
spectacle,
Yep.
which, and it is an entertaining film in its own right. So, um, not to besmirch that film so much as to say that in comparison to High Noon, I
Yep.
think there was a bit of a blunder there that perhaps maybe High Noon might have been a little bit more deserving of that top accolade.
Right.
Uh, High Noon was a very controversial film at the time because it came out at the height of the sort of McCarthy sort of
Red Scare.
the so-called Red Menace, the communist witch hunts that were going on at the time, and this film very much is a kind of a veiled uh, allegory for what was happening in terms of the political climate at the time. People were being asked to, compromise their friendships and their colleagues,
Yep.
all in service of political grandstanding,
Yep.
and so this film is very much about that. It's about one man who's kind of trying to stand up and do the right thing, and he's looking around him and looking for help, and he's looking for his friends to back him up, and he's looking for people to say, hey, this isn't right, let's do something about this. And he can't find anyone who helps him out. So the
Yep.
story is that Gary Cooper plays a marshal in a small town out in the Wild West somewhere, and it's his kind of last day. He's getting married to a lovely Quaker girl who's played by the very, very lovely Grace Kelly. And this, I believe, was it her very first film, I believe,
Is
or
it, I think it probably was certainly one of her first.
yeah, yeah. If not the first, it was definitely a very early role, and it was probably the first step on her way to sort of mega superstardom.
Yeah.
Certainly a lovely woman and very talented, very very good actress. And
Yes.
here she plays his new wife, who is a Quaker and a pacifist. And
Yep.
he's the plan is he's getting married, and then he's hanging up his shield and his gun, and he's going to go off and start a new life with his new bride. But things don't quite work out that way because an old nemesis of his, someone he'd put away in jail many years ago through some sort of political machinations, has been freed and is coming back to the town in order to exact revenge.
Yes.
And so he is faced with a situation where he cannot bring himself to just turn his back and run away. He wants to stand up and face up to this guy so that he just doesn't come back and ruin the town after he's left. And he feels he's duty bound to do this. But when he goes back into town and he's looking for people to deputize to get them to help him out and back him up, uh, no one wants to do it. They're all through their own cowardice and the different sort of politics at play in the town. Nobody will support him, so he has to face this situation on his own. So that basically is the story of the film, and it is very much, it was inspired by the political landscape in America at the time. Apparently, it was a film that John Wayne was originally offered, but he ended up not. He didn't want to do it for obvious reasons, because, like we talked about in a previous episode when we talked a bit about John Wayne,
Yep.
he tended politically to lean very much more to the right, and
Yep.
he, I guess, supported the McCarthy hearings and things like that, and he felt that High Noon was inappropriate and un-American, as they
I saw
say.
that. I saw that. Yeah, in my research. Extraordinary.
Yes, yes. So John Wayne didn't want to do it, and apparently a few other actors were propositioned, and they turned it down for one reason or another. So in the end, it fell to Gary Cooper. So
Yep.
although he wasn't the first choice, he is a really, really great actor.
Wow.
Um, just
I'd never seen a Gary Cooper film before this.
really,
I
oh
don't
my
think
goodness.
so. Yeah. What a great actor.
Yeah, he is fantastic. And when I was researching this film a little bit, it was interesting to note that um, during the making of this film, he was suffering from some health problems. He had a bad back, and he had
Right.
just had an operation of some kind. I'm sorry, I can't remember what it was regarding. I think it was something to do with his stomach, like he had an ulcer or something.
Yeah.
So he was physically struggling during the production. So perhaps in some ways that maybe infested his performance with a little bit of extra sort of pathos and pain. The pain in his face was
Yeah.
real, perhaps.
True. I hadn't thought of
Uh,
that. Yeah, that's great. Great
yeah.
observation.
So it is. So it was really. So it's really quite interesting, and he is really amazing, and as is a lot of the supporting players. A very young Lloyd Bridges, Jeff and Bo
Yes.
Bridges' father, is in
Yep.
this. Is very young in this, so this was obviously quite early in his career, and he of course went on to become a big television star, mainly I think, although he
Right.
did quite a few films as well.
Yep.
And
Lee Van Cleef.
Lee Van Cleef, and this is actually a very early Lee Van Cleef role, and he doesn't. I don't think he says anything in it. It's not.
No,
He's just
he
one
doesn't
of
have
the
to.
henchmen.
He doesn't need to say anything.
That is true. Lee Van Cleef doesn't need to talk at all, and I think there's other films he's been in where he just doesn't need to say anything. He just has to walk. He's just got that. He's got that something, doesn't he? That look and the
Presence.
yeah, that presence and stuff. Um, and yeah, he's terrific. Also, an interesting. You can spot Henry Morgan in there, who of course went on later to be one of the stars of the MASH television series,
Okay.
not the film but the TV series.
Yeah.
And quite interestingly as well is Lon Chaney Jr., who he was prominently known. I think most people remember him as um, a horror film actor and someone who was known for doing a lot of sort of lower budget kind of horror movies. He became famous firstly. I mean, obviously his father was, one of the great film actors and movie stars of all time, and then he became famous when he played the Wolfman in 1941, one of the Universal horror films. And then he ended up kind of getting typecast to a certain extent in playing monsters and in scary movies and things like that. But he did periodically get pulled into films like this, films of a little bit more substance and a little bit uh, where he got a chance to show his acting chops a little bit. And he's really excellent in this film. He only has a few scenes, but they're quite pivotal scenes because he's a former lawman and sort of Gary Cooper's mentor, if you will.
Yeah.
And he's one of the people that Gary Cooper's character approaches to say, "Hey, are you going to back me up here? Are you going to help me?" And he has a great moment where he gives a little speech and says, "Oh, you give your whole life to be a lawman, and all you get for it is either gunned down in the street or you end up broke." And so it's a really good moment, and I like seeing things like that where Lon Chaney, every once in a while he did pop up in films like this in these really key small sort of supporting roles where he really got to show that actually he was a really really good actor, and it's just through the sort of the typecasting and expectations and things he never really got to show his chops that much really.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It was. I mean, it's a great cast. I'd agree on that one.
So what did you think about it, John?
Well, I really liked it because again, it's sort of not your classic western in the sense there's the really a bit like Harry Carey last week. The fight only really happens right at the end,
Hmm.
and so it's all sort of preamble to the fight. So I guess that's sort of not your standard western, and it's also in a. I mean, the town is not a sort of flea-bitten one-horse town because sort of the classic western is set in a very small town. But this one is somewhat prosperous, somewhat established. It looks like it's been there for a while, and I think it's because one of the buildings has 1888 on it, so it's obviously after 1888. So I reckon in the sort of 1890s it's meant to be. And so I was thinking, funnily enough, of one of Fred Zinnemann's other films, Oklahoma, the musical, which I think is sort of set in the 1900s in Oklahoma. So, but it seemed sort of a similar era in American history, where the sort of the Wild West is sort of finished. So they're still sort of settlers in a way, but then it's not so dangerous. And I thought that was really interesting because it's not your classic sort of there's something recognizable about it, um, for viewers now, I suppose. And yeah, this Gary Cooper, he's one of these guys that doesn't seem to perhaps do a lot of, he's just sort of got this extraordinary presence, this amazing sort of face. And yeah, it's basically a sort of moral fable. He goes around to all these guys and says, "Come on, you've got to help me against the baddies who are coming to town." And everybody basically tells him to go away. And
Well,
it's a
there
bit,
are some who want to help him, but at the end of the day, they kind of bow to the pressures or their own kind of self-interest, don't
yes,
they?
or a few of them are unsuitable. So there's
Mm.
two who are unsuitable. One's too young and one's too old, or maybe two are
Yeah,
too old. But
yeah, he's like the town drunkard, isn't he? And
yeah,
he,
there's the town drunkard, and there's a sort of 16-year-old boy, and he sort of says, "Well, yeah, I can't really use you. That would be inappropriate." But yeah, just amazing story, some great dialogue. One of the lines I wrote down: "People got to talk themselves into law and order," which
it's
is
brilliant.
yeah, great line. And I really I like the fact that it's almost told in sort of real time. So it's sort of the film's about an hour and a quarter or something, and essentially they have an hour until the train comes with the baddie on it,
Mm.
and then he's going to sort of raise hell. And so you often get shots of the camera of the clock on the wall, and so you can sort of see time is relentlessly marching forwards to the moment when the train arrives. And I really like that, and that made me think of this work of sort of modern art, I guess, installation that I haven't seen but I've heard about, called The Clock by an American Swiss artist, visual artist called Christian Marclay. And basically, what Christian Marclay did is he got clock sort of excerpts of a clock from various films and television programs, and it's a 24 hours clock. So each second is a different clock from a different film at that time.
All right.
Goodness knows how he did it, but he must have used a number from High Noon, I'd imagine. And somehow there's sort of pretty much each second of the day is in this clock film. And anyway, so I'd imagine that just made that aspect of the film made me think of that. And yeah, his wife, old what's her name, uh, Grace. She's terrifically beautiful, and but she's not just beautiful. She's got sort of her own story and her own character as well, which is very interesting. And
And she becomes quite pivotal, doesn't she, as the film progresses, as the story progresses?
she definitely does, yeah.
Yeah,
Without giving too much away.
yeah. And I mean, the film deals with has a lot of really universal themes, don't they? I think that's one of the reasons the film works so well, because of course anyone could find moments in their life when they feel like they, kind of can't find a friend, or they can't, they're not feeling like they're getting the support that they need, you
Yes.
know. And it's also just about, yeah, a great allegory for, just people who are just going against the grain, the
Yeah.
sort of the zeitgeist of the time.
Standing up for the right thing. Standing on your
Yeah.
own against for the right thing.
Well, yeah, and also just the fact that a lot of the people in the town, because they all know these guys who are coming, and the film mentions periodically the fact that there was a time when the town wasn't a very nice place to be.
Yeah.
That there was a lot of hardship and a lot of crime and violence, and it was the Gary Cooper character who kind of came in and cleaned it all up and changed it. And despite that, the people just can't bring themselves to support him. And
Yeah.
that kind of struck me, because I mean, it kind of reminded me just of sort of the whole sort of modern politics and things, as well, as that so often you see the people en masse kind of can't even really sometimes stand up for in their own self-interest. And
Yeah.
that was very much what you see in this town, because these people know what these guys that are coming are about, and they very much could drag the town backwards back into a time when things
Back to
weren't
the
so
Wild
great.
West, in a way.
Exactly. And despite that, they don't seem to have the sort of the courage to stand up and be counted, and kind of take a risk, to for themselves in order to stand up to maintain their own good life that they've started to have.
Yeah.
So
You
that's
you
what's
might say
quite
this is
striking.
yeah, well, that's true, and you might say it's an example of the um, bite uh, bystander apathy, which is a
Yes.
social psychology sort of theory of people sort of standing by when something awful's happening.
Yes. Yeah, the
Uh,
complacency and the kind of, I'm all right, Jack kind of syndrome, isn't it? Where, it's kind of like, it's not my job I'm not a lawman. It's not my job to do this,
yeah, well,
you
I
know.
would say
Mm.
on to sort of support or to stand up for the interests of the townsfolk for a moment. Uh, they do face the prospect of being shot dead by standing with the marshal.
Mm.
So I can sort of understand that to an extent. It's not like they're just sort of signing a um, petition or going on a march or something. They could end up dead. So who wants that?
When you're watching the film, you can perfectly understand the position that they take.
Yeah,
But to me, quite an interesting character is the one chap who does. He comes to find the marshal right away, and he says, "I'm with you. I'm doing this. But you need to go out and get some more guys." And then, of course, when the marshal can't get any more support, he
yeah,
comes back to him and he says, "No, it's just going to be me and you." And then you have that quite poignant scene with him kind of backtracking and saying, "Well, I did say I was going to help you, and I'm 100% behind you morally, but I'm sorry, man,
not on
but I
my
got a
own or
family."
not. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. I got a family, and I didn't realize it was just going to be me helping you. So actually, sorry, mate, but I'm off.
yeah,
And it's quite a kind of a moving scene in a way because, and especially for Gary Cooper's character, Will Kane is his name, but
that's it.
he that's kind of the last hope that he had of having some help.
Yes,
And he has that moment of like, oh man, I'm really screwed here.
yes.
So yeah. So was there anything else you wanted to say about High Noon, Jonathan?
Not for the moment. Well, I did. One thing I noticed that later, despite the fact that the screenwriter was was he blacklisted? I think he was. Carl Foreman, and he had to. Well, he went off to work in Britain for a couple of decades because of the sort of situation in Hollywood. And but funnily enough, he was blacklisted because they thought he was a communist. I think he may have been at one stage a member of the Communist Party. But funnily enough, it said on the Wikipedia page that there's a picture of Gary Cooper that was used by the Solidarity movement in Poland in the 80s. Sort of, and it's basically said, go and vote for Solidarity against the Communist Party. So, despite the fact that the sort of, you know, the anti-communists in Hollywood at the time were very worried about the film, for instance, John Wayne, he thought it was sort of a pinko film. It played its role in bringing down the sort of communism in Poland, at least, which is quite an irony, I think.
Mm. Well, yeah. Sometimes things happen that way, don't they? In the end, they get co-opted in ways that you don't expect. So that's
Yeah.
quite interesting.
Hmm. So, should we move on to the next film?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, did you want to talk a little bit about your film?
On the point of that knife, a man's life is at stake.
saying. I'm just saying it's possible.
And I say it's not possible.
Yeah, sure. So my film is 12 Angry Men, and it was directed by Sidney Lumet, the great American director, responsible for Network, which is a terrific film, Dog Day Afternoon, and a number of other great movies. He also wrote a book on how to make films, which is definitely worth reading. I've got a copy on my bookshelf. And it was written by a chap called Reginald Rose, and it had originally been a teleplay, and which is basically a sort of short film on the television. And it was sort of so successful, they thought, let's turn this into a movie. And it stars, it's a sort of ensemble cast, but the big star really was Henry Fonda. It also has Lee Cobb, Ed Begley, E.G. Marshall, and Jack Warden. I suppose they don't mean an enormous amount to me, although I guess I've seen some of their faces before in old films. But definitely, Henry Fonda.
Jack Klugman, TV's Quincy, is in here.
Ah, right. Yes, I do remember Quincy being on the TV sort of a while ago when I was young, I think. And so I'll tell you the background to the story. Essentially, almost all of it is set in the room where the jury are meant to deliberate after after hearing the testimony in a court case. Essentially, there's the 12 men, or the 12 angry men, are members of the jury, and they've just heard this murder case in which a young teenage boy has killed, they think he's being accused of killing his father, stabbing his father to death. And there is certainly a lot of circumstantial evidence that points towards the guilt of this young lad. And initially, everybody votes for a guilty verdict until they go around the table until the last person, number 12, who's Henry Fonda, says not guilty. And you sort of, I guess, what's going to happen really is that somehow that situation is going to be reversed, and he's going to have to explain his case, and we're all going to, and people are going to maybe change their minds, and that's really what happens. And it's very interesting because you hear these sort of bits of circumstantial evidence which are sort of exposed as perhaps a bit more flimsy than they might first appear, but as also the characters, each, because the funny thing is that all the characters are men. I did a bit of research. When were juries in the United States? When were women allowed to be jurors? And I think really in the early 20th century, but perhaps not for capital offences like where there might have been a murder verdict, or I think federal offences was in maybe the 60s or 70s. Anyway, in this case, they're all men.
Yeah, they're all white men, kind of
all
of roughly the same age, more or less, although there's a couple sort of older chaps.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, they're all kind of middle-aged white men, aren't they?
They're all middle-aged white men. There's no young ones, really.
No, probably Jack Klugman is probably the youngest guy there, I would say.
Yeah, he is. I think he is the youngest. And initially, you look at them and think, well, they're all pretty similar. Put them in a box, I guess, and it turns out they're all not so similar at all. In fact, they're all very different. And so that's part of it. And just they've all got all their differences and their sort of divergent opinions and experiences make them, if not angry. I wouldn't say they're all 12 angry men. I'd say there's, say, 4 or 5 angry men, and the rest of them are sort of
a couple of right old ornery angry guys, and then some moderately grumpy.
Yeah, exactly. There's one or
Yeah.
two who are, furious men.
Yes.
one in particular who's great, really gives this most amazing performance, who is Lee Cobb, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Juror number 3,
Yes.
and he's the most vociferous for the sort of the guilty party,
Well,
and
maybe Ed Begley gives him a bit of a run for his money, though, doesn't he? Because he's quite a shouty, kind of banging on the table kind of guy, isn't he?
yes, that's true. I guess those two, I felt like Lee Cobb took a bit more of the sort of um, the attract well, it was slightly more prominent, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean they're the most angry, those two, without a
Yeah.
doubt. And Henry Fonda is the sort of very, very cool customer who never gets flustered and basically dismantles all these witness reports, and which is a bit funny because he's meant to be an architect, so I'm not sure
Yes.
quite how that skill set plays into his uh, skills in the courtroom. But anyway, somehow he does
Well,
it.
perhaps the attention to detail and he's very rational, isn't he? I think that's the thing. Whereas some of the
Yes,
characters, not all, but some of them are quite a little bit irrational, very emotional. He kind of represents someone who's completely rational, calm, analytical, and uses very low level manner of persuasion to get
yes,
his point across. He doesn't do any hysterics or
no,
slamming and shouting and getting angry. It's all
no.
reason, you
Well,
know.
I was wondering, but he does use emotion, but very, very intelligently.
Mm,
I was wondering, is this film taught? Not, I'm sure it's taught in film schools, possibly in law schools, and maybe even in sort of persuasion and negotiation classes as well,
mm.
because the way he manages to win these angry men over to his point of view is extraordinary. I'm sure
Yeah,
we could all learn a lot.
yeah. It's quite the kind of the best thing about it is the fact that, I mean, quite similar to High Noon, there is an element of the kind of the lone man who's
Yes,
standing against the kind of popular consensus. Because the
yes,
film starts out with they all 11 of them basically just say, okay, he's guilty. It's obvious he's guilty. Come on, let's get this over with and go home because I want to go and watch the ball game or whatever. And
yeah,
so there is an element too of that kind of, there is that complacency there too of just like, yeah, it's obvious he's guilty. They just want to accept that and get on with it. And he's this one lone voice amongst this group who says, no,
yeah,
no, wait a minute. We need to talk about this. We need to, discuss this and dissect these elements of the case a bit more thoroughly.
yes. He's
Um,
standing alone, like Gary Cooper is standing alone, essentially.
yeah, but I guess the difference here in this one is that he uh, does manage through the course of the film by using that rational argument and the very intelligently turning the facts of the case, putting the spotlight on them. He manages to bring more and more of them over to his side of the argument. So and
Yeah,
it's very riveting in that way, like because it's but not in the in the sense of like a thriller or something like that, but or an action film or something like that. But it's quite riveting in the sense of the intellectual arguments that he puts forward and how he manages to use that to persuade people over to his way of thinking.
yeah. Well, it's meant to be the second best courtroom drama ever, according to the American Film Institute, after
Oh,
To
there
Kill a
you go.
Mockingbird.
Oh, right. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh, and another connection that they both have is that not only do they have heroes who are standing alone against sort of everybody else, the consensus. But they're both set on incredibly hot days. So
Yes,
in both
that's
films, you've
true.
got people mopping their brows constantly.
Constantly dripping with sweat. Yes, while
Yeah,
they, you know, which I guess kind of gives it that extra sense of urgency and sort of that ambience that's quite essential. I think
yeah,
to the tension in the pieces really.
yeah. Well,
Um,
one of the great things I liked about the film as well was the script. I mean, the script in this one is just extraordinary. It's I wrote down loads of lines, more actually than with High Noon. And the interesting thing about this film is that it lost out for its Best Picture Oscar to Bridge on the River Kwai.
mm,
And who wrote the script for Bridge on the River Kwai? None other than old what's his name, Carl Foreman, who wrote the script for High Noon. Can,
whoa,
can you believe
isn't
it?
it? That is amazing. Where I'm flushed with factoid. It's a factoid moment there, definitely. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, that's amazing. So, although High Noon didn't win, so in the end he won. Did he win the Oscar for Best Screenplay
He,
for Bridge on the River Kwai?
I'm not sure if he won the Oscar actually, but the film. I mean, I guess his Oscar definitely his work. Yes, he did. He was a yeah. I think he was. But certainly, his script can't have hurt, can it?
No,
In winning.
definitely not. I mean, I'm looking here, and it says that Carl Foreman was nominated for Best Screenplay for High Noon.
Yes, but it's
Um,
certainly an amazing script full of great lines. It's possible for lawyers to be just plain stupid, which is a great word. And I'm not used to supposing, which is another great one. Um, and yeah, it's just terrific lines. Yeah, really, really good film. Been remade as well.
oh yeah, numerous times, and I think there's been stage adaptations, or what was it? A
Yep.
stage? Was it a stage play first before the television
I don't,
version, and then the film? I
don't
don't know.
think it was actually, but yeah, it has been put on the stage as well, and I think there's been foreign versions of it too, sort of in yeah. So it's a massive deal, this film as well. Both films, great, really good, and
Well,
funny enough, it has Henry Fonda, who's very well known for his roles in westerns as well.
that's right. Yeah, and again, another really great actor.
Yeah.
Um, one of the moments I really liked was the Ed Begley's character, who throughout the film, uh, his prejudice, he wears his prejudice on his sleeve, doesn't he? And he's
Yes.
seeing the he sees the trial as kind of a way of getting at this. I mean, do they specify the ethnicity of the young man who's
They
on
don't,
trial?
which I think is very clever because they
Yeah,
never really tell you much about him, but they keep on referring to him as them and those guys and sort of,
yeah.
but that's
But I
enough
mean,
because then you
there's
can
an
put,
implication that he's from a poor background. He lives in
oh,
sort of a
definitely.
more sort of a ghetto-y kind of area, and
Yeah.
he's obviously some sort of ethnic minority.
Yeah.
Whereas this group is they're all just, as we said, middle-aged white guys.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is that he's the one who wears, although they all have their own kind of prejudice that come out throughout the course of the film. This one is the most overt kind of racist,
Yeah.
prejudiced person. And that great moment when he has, one of several outbursts towards the end of the film, and they all get up and turn their backs on him in that great moment
Yes.
of,
Yes.
where he suddenly becomes the one who's isolated. And I think that was a really great moment.
Yeah.
And I especially, another moment that I liked very much, which this is the first time I've noticed it watching this film, is right at the very beginning, that really lovely shot of this boy who's the accused.
Yep.
As the men are leaving, they just have a brief moment on that boy and on his
Yes.
face, and you know in that moment his fate, his life hangs in the balance on what these 12 men decide as they go through that door, and they just dwell on his face just for that moment. And it's beautifully pitched, the look on his face, that you can see that what that my life literally is in the hands of those chaps. They were walking out that door right now,
Yeah.
and that's a really beautiful moment.
Yeah, well, one of the things we should say is you've got to have all 12 people have to vote either guilty or not guilty.
Yes, they
Because
have to be there. There can't be like it's not like
no dissenters, no
yeah,
dissenting voices, basically.
yeah. So that makes it quite interesting.
Yeah.
And another key thing that really struck me, I mean, certainly now I think this is a kind of an essential film when you think about nowadays, because we live in this kind of culture now, with the social media and everything, where we've kind of lost that gift of reasoned discussion and debating of issues, haven't
Yeah.
we? To a certain extent, it's all very much this sort of
Sound
cancel
bites.
culture and kind
Yeah.
of a mob rules kind of
Yeah.
arguments that happen within kind of public discourse now,
Yeah.
the people who hold dissenting views are quite literally run out of town in every sense of the word,
Yes.
kind of ostracized
Yeah.
in the kind of social media space and thought. So I found it quite refreshing to revisit this film and just see a situation with people actually sitting down and having a conversation about a disagreement and working it out and sort of talking it through. And they might still argue and get angry and get flustered,
Yeah.
but there's still that, especially Henry Fonda's character, of taking the time to say, no, let's talk this out. Let's
Yes.
discuss this rationally and explore these issues and come to an agreement.
Yeah.
And so I thought that, is kind of a nice, refreshing thing to see, because nowadays that, it just seems like it anyway. Sometimes in our culture at the minute, that we're losing that.
Very much.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Well, he's got a lot of patience, which is very unusual in today's
yes,
climate. It
yeah,
feels like, and there's another sort of great line from the film that I wrote down. Somebody says, "Nice bunch of guys," and then Henry Fonda's character replies, "They're about the same as everyone else." And I think,
yes,
well,
yeah. I'm
that's
glad you mentioned that. That's a great moment in the bathroom. That is a great line because, yeah,
yeah. I
it,
mean,
it it
I guess
sums it up
in a sense,
beautifully.
this is the whole universality of these, well, both films in a way.
Mm.
The people in High Noon are a nice bunch of guys as well, but they're
Well,
about
yeah,
the same as
exactly.
everyone else.
And like we talked about, I mean, you can criticize the certain decisions that they make and things, but they are all regular people, and you can certainly understand and put yourself in their position and kind of say, "Oh, yeah, well, I can see where they're coming from."
Yep.
And I understand. I mean, in High Noon, they had that great moment in the church when he goes into the church and
Mm.
interrupts the service and says, like, everyone, I need some help. And they end up having this sort of
Debate.
impromptu town hall debate
Yeah.
about the the rights and wrongs of the situation and what they should do. And that was a really great moment of people kind of saying, well, this is where I'm coming from. And you can kind of see that you can empathize with all of them and
Yeah.
understand where they're coming from, even if you don't agree with them.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a nice thing. And I think, as I said at the beginning, it was coincidental that we picked both these films, but they
Yeah.
do have an undercurrent, a sort of very similar kind of themes. I think that they kind of go together quite nicely. And I
Definitely.
watched them over 2 nights. I watched High Noon on Sunday and watched 12 Angry Men the next night. And it was quite interesting to see them together like that and be able to pick up on that really nicely. So,
Yeah. The same with me. I watched them one night after the other, and yeah, it's funny that just 5 years apart, but
Yeah.
with very similar films. Perhaps that was something about the 50s, that sort of the
Mm.
conformity of the 50s in America.
Yeah,
Not
very much, very much.
not
And like I say, I think they both they have quite universal themes that are kind of relevant today. I think either one of these
yeah
films, you could argue, could touch on some of the things that are going on in our society at the moment, in a way.
yeah
So
definitely
yeah, so really great, and it's amazing to think because both of these films they're those kind of films that even if people haven't seen them, they've definitely heard of them. They've heard the
yeah
titles and they'd be familiar with the titles and they'd go, oh, yes, I've heard of 12 Angry Men. I've heard of High Noon.
yeah
And definitely it was nice to revisit them tonight.
absolutely. I'd highly recommend them to everybody who hasn't seen them, like
Yeah.
me this time last week.
Well, it was great. So how did you watch them, Jonathan?
Oh yes, so High Noon I watched on Amazon Prime,
Okay. And was
and
that a paid, was that a rental or was it,
yeah, it's
was
a
it
rental.
actually?
Yeah, so they
Yeah.
have
Okay.
some films you have to pay for. I think it was £3.50.
Hmm.
And the 12 Angry Men I watched on YouTube, which I also rented, which was also £3.50, I think. And yeah, those they are available on both films are available on Blu Ray and DVD, aren't they?
They are, yeah. Actually, High Noon is. I have the Masters of Cinema Blu-ray edition, which is absolutely excellent. It's a really beautiful 4K restoration, absolutely stunning, and it's got lots of nice contextual supplementary material that goes along with it, which is one of the great advantages of for those of us who still collect kind of physical media. You don't just get the film, you get a nice little package with this one's got like a really lovely book with loads of articles and essays and things and sort of contextual stuff, and then there's
Yep,
some nice documentaries and interviews and other things that are there as supplements. So there's lots there if you really like the film, and you would. So there's lots of extra stuff to dive into.
yep,
And 12 Angry Men, sorry, is available from Criterion, a really lovely Blu-ray. And Criterion, of course, do the same thing. They do lovely sort of collector's editions with lots and lots of excellent supplementary materials. One of the most interesting ones on the 12 Angry Men disc is the actual original television version that Sidney Lumet did before they made the film.
oh really?
So
Oh
they
wow,
actually have the teleplay on there as a bonus, so you
brilliant.
can get to watch this an alternate version of the story and
Yep,
how they did it in the television format. And this would back in the day when it was like live television, they would have literally staged it as like a stage play with a couple of TV cameras and done it live in a
right.
studio and televised it.
Yes,
So luckily that was recorded for posterity, and it's included on that disc along with lots of other really interesting things. So definitely, if you've got a Blu-ray player, I would go out and track those discs down. I think they're both still in print and still
yep,
available. So definitely go out and search those out if you're interested.
yeah. I believe they recorded those films that were shown on TV on a kinescope or kine.
Yes, kinescopes. Yeah, which is basically means they ran a film camera pointing at a television
Yep,
monitor, basically, and they had to sync up the frame rate so that they didn't get those like little lines that run through the picture.
okay,
So that the old kinescopes is the way that a lot of really early television was preserved at all.
right. Yeah,
So uh, so
well done for
yeah,
the kinescope. Thank you.
so I didn't get time, unfortunately, in preparation for the show. I would have liked to have actually watched that to compare and contrast before we talked about it. But unfortunately, you know, There's only so many hours in the day.
Exactly.
Yes, and one must sleep and, other things. So,
Other essential matters.
yes. But anyway, well, that's great. I think we've had a good conversation about these two
Definitely.
films. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on, Jonathan, tonight?
No, I think that is about it. Well, one thing I was going to say is that Gary Cooper was, I think his family were from Bedfordshire, which is not far from where I live.
Oh,
And his parents sent him back to school in in Bedfordshire, but it didn't work out. He wasn't terribly happy, so then he went back to America again and carried on his education in the United States. And but yeah, anyway, what a great actor! I'm going to have to look out for more of his films in the future.
definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, was there any other, like, anything else you've been up to lately, Jonathan? Anything you've read or watched or seen or done that you wanted to talk about?
I watched this documentary on Netflix about Orson Welles called "They'll Love Me When I'm Dead,"
Oh,
uh,
yes, I've seen that as well. Yeah.
which is all about the ill-fated production of The Other Side of the Wind, which is Orson Welles' final movie, which didn't really get finished. Well, it turns out it has been finished. Sort of when they made this documentary, they also finished off The Other Side of the Wind, and the on the poster for The Other Side of the Wind it says 40 years in the making. So basically, Orson Welles sort of pretty much finished making it, but then I think the financiers of the film basically had control of the print, and so he never got to actually put the final finish it and release it. And somehow it's now been got hold of and released into the wild. And so I haven't seen that yet, but "They'll Love Me When I'm Dead" is really interesting, narrated by Alan Cumming, the Scottish actor, and it's got lots of interesting people in it, like Peter Bogdanovich and Sybil Shepherd and Danny Houston and well, not Danny. Well, it does have Danny Houston, but it also has his dad. What's his name? The original Houston. And yeah, it's terrific. Well, interesting, not terrific, but very John Huston. It's got John
John
Huston in
Huston,
it,
yeah.
and it's an interesting documentary. I'd recommend it, especially if you're interested in Orson Welles, which probably many film fans are. Worth
Yeah,
their
it's
salt,
quite a
anyway.
fascinating story about The Other Side of the Wind. And actually, Orson Welles had several projects like that he spent years trying to get finished, and you should definitely go back and check out The Other Side of the Wind. Although it always has that feeling when you have someone else who comes along many years later to finish something
Yes.
for somebody who's long since passed away, you kind of know in the back of your head that this probably isn't how it would have ended up had Orson Welles actually got to finish it himself. But at least we have some way of at least getting an idea and seeing something akin to a finished product.
Yeah.
And it is pretty good, actually, The Other Side of the Wind, the version that's there. I think it was Peter Bogdanovich was one of the
Yeah.
principal people behind getting it done, because he was sort of Orson Welles' closest sort of friend and confidant at the time,
Yeah.
and he's one of the lead actors in the film. So he, I guess, better than anyone would be placed to have some idea of what Wells intended. So
Yes. That's the
definitely
impression
worth
you get from the
checking out.
documentary. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Oh, brilliant. Lately, I've been, in terms of film watching, I've been working my way through. Uh, there's a company called Indicator. Well, sorry, it's kind of a label, a sub-label of a
Oh yeah.
company called Powerhouse Films, and they do once again these very lavish and well presented collectible editions of classic films and things, and uh, they've done a box set called Mae West in Hollywood, and Mae West was, of course, a very famous star of the 30s who was, the "Why don't you come up and see me sometime?"
Is that famous line?
That was her. She was this sort of sassy, liberated woman who was really great with these funny one-liners and things. And it's quite a fascinating set because it collects almost all of her films, certainly all of the films that she did for Paramount, and then she did a couple more later for Universal and um, uh, one or two others, MGM or something. And so it collects them all together. And again, it has lots of really great contextual stuff about it. So although not, some of the films are better than others,
Yep.
there are a few of them that are really, really good, and then some of them that are just sort of more light entertainment. And there are a few of them that are a bit formulaic. They kind of have effectively the same story, just in a slightly different setting. But as a whole, it's quite interesting just to see this body of work. She was quite an interesting character. She wrote all her films herself, and she was
Really?
very much sort of someone who knocked heads with the censors because she did have this aura as being a sort of sexually liberated and open woman who
Yep.
had lots of fellas. Um,
Yep.
she is just like a kind of a one of a kind personality in these films. She kind of has this kind of weird sassy walk and her voice,
Mm.
and she sings, but she kind of like has this kind of weird way that she presents herself and stuff. And so she's just like a really interesting person. And I
Yep.
always, she was always one of those people growing up. I just always had a perception of her in a certain way of being this kind of silly character.
Yep.
And it was never really that interested, but going and seeing this whole career that she had and learning a bit more about her and stuff has been a really interesting experience.
Mm.
So definitely for people who'd be interested in that, it's just a nice little sort of potted history in a box of this woman's career in Hollywood,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting. And I've been enjoying working my way through it. And would really recommend that for if you're interested. I think it's still available. These sets that Indicator do are limited editions, so they only do however many thousand copies that they produce. So once they sell out, then that's it. You're out of luck. But I'm
Okay.
pretty sure because it's only been out for, I think it just kind of came out at the tail end of last year. So I
Yep.
think there's still probably a few copies kicking around. So it's definitely worth, and it's good value. I mean, they cost like about sort of 30-40 pounds, but you get like 10 movies and a book and all sorts of extra stuff that comes with it. So they're actually quite good value for money, really. You get lots of
Yeah.
bang for your buck there. So definitely worth going and searching that out as well.
Sounds like it. Brilliant. Well, I've heard the name, but I've never seen any of her films, so thank you for the recommendation.
Great.
Mm.
Okay. Well, listeners, I think we're going to wrap it up there because we've just cracked the hour point. And I think, I think I should just mention that you should come out and come out and see us sometime out on in the social media space
Oh
because
yeah.
we now have all kinds of points there that you can find us. We've got a Facebook group, so if you come and look for us there, just look up Film Swap the podcast. And come and join us there, and you can have a discussion about the films that we talked about tonight, or really anything else that you want to recommend or talk about film related. We'd love to hear from you. We're on Twitter, so you can find us at Film Swap UK, and you can also find it. We're on YouTube, and we've started branching out a little bit. Aside from the podcast, we're starting to do some other little videos and things like that. Then we're putting out little bits of content here and there. So come and find us on YouTube. It's at film swap _ podcast. So that's us on YouTube, and just keep watching that space because we got some ideas for different stuff that we're going to do, just film related, little things, and we're just having some fun right now doing some little videos and factoids. We're doing a little
Factoids. All
series
about the
of
factoids.
yes, we're doing a little film swap factoids, and we're gonna try and get a couple of those out a week. So come out and find us there, and and subscribe so you don't miss anything. You wouldn't want to miss
Yep.
anything.
No.
So by all means, click that subscribe button and help us reach some more people as well. So on that note, Jonathan, nice to see you, and
Good to see you, David. And thank you for your
we'll talk
recommendation.
soon.
It was really good. I enjoyed that film.
Yeah, you too. I've really enjoyed this week. I enjoyed these films immensely, and I hope some other people go and check them out as well.
Definitely. Let's hope so.
Cool. Okay, listeners, we'll see you next time.